The wail of an ambulance droned below her fourth-floor apartment window, a mournfully familiar sound in the city that never sleeps. Elena pressed the phone tighter to her ear, trying to filter out the New York noise to hear her 15-year-old son's broken voice on the other end of the line hundreds of miles away, in the unnervingly quiet valleys of West Virginia. "Mom, come home. Come home now." Liam's voice trembled, cracking with panic. Elena's chest tightened. She had just returned from a double shift at a restaurant, her fingers still aching from scrubbing and her feet swollen. "What is it, sweetheart? Where's your brother?" He's not himself," Liam sobbed. "He's talking to people who aren't there. He goes out at night, Mom, near the creek. He says, the barrels will soon be filled." "What barrels?" Elena asked, a chill running down her spine despite the suffocating summer heat in her non-air-conditioned apartment. "I don't know. He says we can't understand. That we'll see soon. Mom, I'm scared to sleep. I tried to talk to him, but he won't let me. He's locked his bedroom door and won't let anyone in." The phone went silent for a moment, filled only by Liam's ragged breaths. "Yesterday," the boy continued, his voice barely a whisper. "He told Maya not to sing in the house. He said her voice was bothering the whispers. Mom, what do I do? I'm with my sister. He doesn't want us near his room." "Stay with your sister, Liam. Lock your bedroom door tonight. Do you hear me? Lock it tight." She hung up, her heart pounding in her chest. Immediately, a new message popped up. This time it was from Maya, her sweet 8-year-old daughter. It was a blurry, hastily taken photo of her brother's bedroom door. The old oak door was shut tight, and in front of it stood two enormous blue barrels, the industrial kind, looking completely out of place in the narrow hallway of their rickety house. They were half filled with water. Beneath the photo was a single scrawled line. "Mommy Caleb said not to touch. He said it's liquid money. It's not awake yet." Liquid money awake. The words swirled in Elena's mind, nonsensical, yet carrying an ominous weight. She thought back over the past few months. First, there was Caleb's call about a skills training course in a neighboring town. "This is my chance, Mom," he had pleaded. "I can learn a trade, get a real job." But they need a deposit by the end of the month. Elena, looking at the meager stack of dollars on her kitchen table after paying rent and sending grocery money home, had hesitated. "I don't have enough, son." "Send what you can," Caleb had insisted. "I'll figure out the rest. They said I can pay in installments." And she had sent it. She worked overtime, took on extra cleaning shifts on weekends, ate bread for dinner, convinced she was investing in her son's future. But that was only the beginning. A few weeks later, Caleb called again. "Mom, I want to start a small business. Nothing big, just something so you don't have to work so hard. I can take care of the kids too." That day, Elena had felt a surge of pride. Her son was finally growing up, thinking like a responsible man. She scraped together more money, borrowed a little from a friend, and sent it again. But now, staring at the picture of the two blue barrels and her daughter's strange message, she realized something had gone terribly, horribly wrong. Her pride evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping fear. She dialed another number. Rick, the children's father, picked up on the fifth ring, his voice groggy and annoyed. Elena unleashed a torrent of words, hastily explaining the calls, the messages, the barrels, and the fear in Liam's voice. He listened, or pretended to, then let out a long yawn. "He'll be fine, Elena. He's probably just mixed up in some teenage nonsense." "Didn't you see the picture?" she nearly screamed. "There are two industrial barrels in our house, Rick. Caleb is talking about liquid money and the whispers. This isn't teenage nonsense. So get rid of them," Rick replied dismissively. "Every house has a few barrels. I'll swing by and check on things when I have time." The line went dead. Elena stood frozen in the middle of her room, the silent phone still pressed to her ear. She was alone. Completely alone. She wanted to scream, to smash something. Instead, she slowly knelt on the cool floor. She pulled out the tin box hidden under her bed. Inside was her entire life savings, the fruit of months of back-breaking labor. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Another message from Maya suddenly appeared, making the phone vibrate on the floor. "Mommy," she had written. "Caleb says the barrels are thirsty. He says they need a special kind of water to wake up." A special kind of water. The phrase froze the blood in Elena's veins. This was no longer just madness, it was a threat. She didn't hesitate another second. She began stuffing the money into her pockets, her hands trembling. A few days later, as the first gray light of a New York dawn streaked across the skyscrapers, Elena walked out of her apartment with her only suitcase. She didn't look back. Finally, when the Greyhound bus pulled into the dusty bus station of her hometown, she was back. A few yards away, under the dim glow of a streetlight, a small figure was waiting. "Liam, it's me." Elena ran, throwing her arms around her lanky son. "Mom!" Liam burst into tears, burying his face in her shoulder. "You're really here." She placed a hand on her son's cheek, her eyes already searching for another silhouette. "And Maya? Where is she?" Liam lowered his head, his voice a mumble. "She's at home. I left her at home with Caleb." Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. "Why, you weren't supposed to leave her alone with him," he said. Liam looked up, his tear-filled eyes wide with fear. "He said he wanted to show her something. He said tonight was a special night. He said the barrels were finally going to wake up." Elena gripped Liam's hand, her knuckles turning white. "Let's go. Fast." The familiar walk from the bus station to her house had never seemed so long or so menacing. Every clapboard house with its peeling paint, every overgrown lawn, seemed to watch them with a judgmental silence. The thick air of rural West Virginia, something she had once craved in the heart of bustling New York, now felt suffocating. She could smell the damp earth and decaying leaves, and something else too, a faint foul odor like stagnant water. Their house appeared at the end of the road, a modest 2-story structure that looked even smaller and more fragile than she remembered. The lights were on inside, casting a sickly yellow glow through the windows. The front door was ajar. "He never leaves the door open," Liam whispered, his voice trembling. Elena didn't answer. She pushed her son behind her and walked up the creaking steps. She placed her hand on the cold brass doorknob and pushed gently. The door groaned as it swung open. Inside, the silence was even heavier than outside. The furniture was the same. The threadbare sofa, the faded rug, the crookedly hung family photos, but the atmosphere was different. It was thick and oppressive, as if a storm were silently brewing within these walls. Then she saw her. Maya was sitting ramrod straight on a chair at the dining table, her hands placed neatly in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, as if she were afraid to look up. She wasn't crying, but her tense silence was more terrifying than any sob. "Maya!" Elena rushed to her, kneeling and wrapping her arms around her small daughter. Maya's body trembled in her embrace. "Are you okay, my princess?" But Elena felt another gaze on her. In the shadows of the hallway, Caleb was standing. He didn't run out, didn't scream. He just stood there, a tall, gaunt figure almost melting into the darkness. "Mom," he said, his voice unnervingly flat. "You're back." Elena swallowed hard, slowly rising to her feet, keeping Maya firmly behind her. "Caleb, what the hell is going on here?" A strained, empty smile crossed Caleb's lips. "You'll finally get to see. The barrels are almost ready." Liam tensed beside her. Maya clung tighter to her mother's leg. Elena took a deep breath, her eyes locked on her eldest son. She saw it, she knew it. This was not the boy she had left behind. His eyes had a strange glint in the dim light, and there was a terrifying stillness to the way he stood, as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. Later that evening, after tucking Maya into bed in Liam's room and locking the door, Elena sat facing Caleb in the living room. Liam stood silently in a corner, watching, his hands clenched into fists. "Tell me the truth, Caleb. What's happening to you?" Her son stared at a point over her shoulder for a long moment, then let out a soft, mirthless laugh. You wouldn't understand. No one understands. Mrs. Abernathy showed me the way. Elena narrowed her eyes. Who is that woman? Caleb tilted his head, that strange smile returning. She's the one who promised me we'd never have to be hungry again. The one who told me money could flow like water. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her. She had left her children to protect them from poverty. But her eldest son in her absence had found refuge in the arms of a mysterious woman. Where does she live? What did she tell you? Elena tried to keep her voice calm. Caleb stood up, pacing the room, his footsteps nearly silent. Don't you get it? We have nothing here. Nothing. Dad left. You send us a few dollars from that faraway place, but it's never enough. I wanted more. I wanted to change everything. He stopped, turning to face his mother. And then I met her. Mrs. Abernathy. He continued, his voice trembling with an emotion Elena couldn't identify, excitement or perhaps fear. She lives alone in an old cabin near Blackwood Creek. Everyone in town says she's crazy, a witch. They stay away from her. But I knew they were wrong. She talked to me, Mom. She said this land has memories, that the creek doesn't just carry water, but the desires and despairs of people who have lived here for centuries. She said she could open a door to prosperity. What prosperity, Caleb? She's a con artist, it's a trap. Elena shot up. But Caleb just shook his head, a look of pity on his face. No, she was telling the truth. She showed me how. She gave me the instructions. It was simple. It required an investment, a promise, and the barrels would fill with riches. Liam from his corner finally spoke, his voice cracking. An investment. You call that an investment, Caleb? You gave her all the money Mom sent. The money for the course, the money for the business. It was all a lie. Caleb whipped around to face his brother, his eyes flashing with anger. What do you know? You only see what's in front of you. You don't see the bigger picture. He turned back to Elena, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. It wasn't a gift, Mom. It was a deposit, a sacrifice to show I was serious. She said the creek needed an offering, something for it to remember. And then the barrels would awaken. He paused, a wild, ecstatic smile spreading across his face. And the next morning, one of the barrels was full of water as dark as creek mud, and the other was full of money. Real money, Mom. I touched it. I felt it in my hands. But there was nothing there, Liam shouted, tears welling in his eyes. I saw your barrels were empty, Caleb. It was just clear water. Caleb lunged at his younger brother, grabbing him by the collar. Because you don't know how to look. Because you refuse to believe, you're too stupid and blind. Stop it, Elena yelled, throwing herself between her two sons, pushing them apart. She looked directly into Caleb's eyes, and for the first time a true deep-seated fear took root in her. Maybe this wasn't just delusion. Maybe this woman, this Mrs. Abernathy, had truly opened some door in her son's mind. A door that could no longer be closed. What did you do, Caleb? She asked, her voice trembling. What did she ask you to do? Caleb drew himself up, his features hardening. She said to keep the door open, the offering must be renewed, that the barrels would soon be thirsty again. He looked over Elena's shoulder, his gaze fixed on the dark hallway where Maya's room was. And it needs something pure, something this world hasn't tainted yet. Elena couldn't sleep that night. She sat in the old armchair in the living room. The room plunged into a darkness, illuminated only by the silvery moonlight filtering through the window. From upstairs she could hear Caleb pacing in his room, his relentless footsteps like the frantic beat of a panicked heart. Occasionally she would hear him muttering disjointed, incomprehensible words, as if he were arguing with an invisible person. She thought back on everything he had said, but more than that, she remembered the past months in New York, the calls, the messages, her son's urgent requests, and her own sacrifices. Everything, all of it, had been a lie. The money wasn't for a course nor for any business. It had flowed directly into the pockets of the mysterious witch by the creek, Mrs. Abernathy. You betrayed me, she whispered into the darkness, hot tears rolling down her cheeks. Her world was collapsing. The son she loved with all her heart, the child she had worked to exhaustion to raise, had sold not only the family's dreams, but also a piece of his own soul. In the corner of the living room, Liam was also awake. He sat with his knees drawn to his chest, a silent figure in the shadows. When he heard his mother's whisper, he spoke, his voice hoarse with fatigue and sorrow. It's because he wanted to get rich without waiting Mom. She promised him a shortcut. Elena finally understood. Caleb hadn't just been deceived. He had been willing to be deceived. Desperation and impatience had made him easy prey for empty promises. The next day, Elena decided she had to get the whole truth. She made Caleb sit down and tell her everything from beginning to end. At first, he resisted circling around the truth, speaking in half-truths. But under his mother's steady and grief-stricken gaze, he finally broke. "You think this is a joke?" he began, his voice trembling. "You think I'm lying?" "No, I saw it. I lived it. One night, my friend Kevin and I went to see Mrs. Abernathy." He explained that she had asked each of them to gather a sum of money as good faith for the ritual. On the appointed day, Kevin hadn't managed to get enough. He had begged his family, borrowed from friends, but was still short. Mrs. Abernathy had looked at him with contempt. "Not enough," she had said, her voice as cold as ice. "Go home. Prosperity is not for those who come empty-handed." Kevin left, Caleb said, his eyes distant, his face red with shame. "But I stayed. I had enough money, the money you sent." Mrs. Abernathy had led him deeper into the woods behind her cabin to a clearing by Blackwood Creek. Not far away, a black goat was tied to a tree stump. She pulled out an old hunting knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight, and pressed it into Caleb's hand. "Do it," she whispered, her breath smelling of dried herbs. "The creek is thirsty." Caleb hesitated. The goat struggled, its panicked eyes reflecting the moon. I can't," he stammered. "If you cannot," she hissed, "then wealth will never come to you. You will be stuck in this mud forever, just like your father, just like everyone else in this God-forsaken town." Her words were like a knife to Caleb's pride. He closed his eyes, raised the blade, and drew it forcefully across the animal's throat. Blood spurted out warm and thick, splashing onto his hands and face. Mrs. Abernathy immediately produced an earthenware bowl, catching the flowing stream. When the bowl was full, she motioned for him to stop. "Cleanse yourself," she commanded, and then threw the entire bowl of blood over Caleb. The coppery smell of iron filled his nostrils, making him nauseous. Then she pointed towards the creek. "Get in. Wash until I say stop." Caleb stumbled into the frigid water, scrubbing himself over and over, until she nodded in satisfaction, saying he had been purified. Afterward, she handed him the bowl again. At the bottom, a few last drops of blood remained. "Drink," she commanded. Caleb obeyed, his tongue running along the inside of the bowl, licking up every last trace. The barbaric ritual continued. Mrs. Abernathy used the same knife to cut open the animal's chest, reached her wrinkled hand inside, and pulled out the still faintly beating heart. She placed it in Caleb's palm. "Feel it," she whispered. "This is the heartbeat of wealth." Then she led him to an ancient oak tree at the edge of the woods. She dug a small hole in the earth with her bare hands and motioned for Caleb to place the heart inside. As he did, she began to chant words in an ancient language he didn't understand. She finished by saying the ground would remember that this sacrifice had been accepted. She ordered him to buy 2 identical blue barrels and place them side by side in the house. "One will flow with the sacrifice," she said. "The other will flow with the reward." Caleb had followed blindly. He bought the barrels, placed them in front of his room, and at midnight, he filled them both with clear water. The next morning, Caleb said, his voice almost a whisper, "When I opened my eyes, I saw the impossible. One of the barrels no longer held clear water. It was thick and dark as blood. And the other, inside dollar bills were piled up, soaking wet but completely real." He described how he had reached his hand in his fingers, gliding over the damp paper. He had laughed a shrill laugh of disbelief and joy. But his joy was short-lived. The next day, when he checked again, the money was gone. Both barrels once again contained only clear water, because there was never anything there. Liam jumped from his chair, unable to contain himself any longer. "You're insane, Caleb! Insane! It was a hallucination!" Caleb turned on his brother, his eyes wild. "Shut up! You saw nothing! You don't understand!" He turned back to Elena, his eyes pleading. "Mrs. Abernathy said it was just a test. That true wealth requires a greater sacrifice, something more precious than an animal." Elena, her face wet with tears, begged, "Stop this, son, please stop. You're losing yourself." But Caleb replied wearily, his shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world was on them. "I can't stop, Mom. I've gone too far. And she said if I don't finish what I started, the creek will take back what it gave. It will take something from me." In the days that followed, the house was submerged in a suffocating atmosphere as tense as a guitar string about to snap. Caleb was no longer Caleb. He spoke only of his barrels of the coming sacrifice and reward. Every morning at the crack of dawn, as the first rays of sun pierced the thick valley fog, he would rush to the hallway, lifting the lids of the barrels with a sick fanaticism, like a child checking on a hidden treasure. "Look, Mom," he would exclaim one morning, his voice filled with excitement. "They're filling up. Do you see? The water is changing color. This side is the sacrifice, and this side will soon have money." Elena would approach, her heart heavy. She would peer inside the barrels. There was nothing but clear water, perhaps a little murky with dust. "Caleb," she would say softly, trying to suppress the desperation in her voice, "these are just barrels of water, sweetheart." He would turn to her, his crazed eyes glaring angrily. "You refuse to see? You're just as blind as the others. You don't believe me." He would slam the lids shut, the metallic clang echoing through the quiet house. Liam had stopped arguing. He just watched silently from a distance, hiding in a corner of the hallway or behind a slightly open door. Every time he tried to object, Caleb would scream, accusing him of trying to steal his wealth, calling him jealous and weak. Once, in a fit of rage, Caleb had lifted a wooden chair, about to throw it at his younger brother before Elena managed to intervene. At night, things were worse. Caleb barely slept. Elena would often be jolted awake by banging on the walls, by angry muttering. She would find him running to the hallway, his eyes wide in the darkness, his hands plunging into the barrels. "Look, Mom," he'd gasp as she followed him. "Look, the money is piling up." He would thrust his hands into the water and, raising his empty palms, smile as if they were overflowing with wet dollar bills. Elena would gently pull him back into the house. "Son, you're not well. We need to get help." "No," he would resist, wrenching his arm away. "Mrs. Abernathy told me this whole family will soon be rich. You won't have to work anymore. We'll leave this God-forsaken place." Elena's fear grew daily. Caleb's madness was no longer just harmless delusions. It was morphing into a dangerous obsession, and the center of that obsession seemed to be slowly shifting towards Maya. She was the purest, the most innocent in the house, and in Caleb's twisted mind that innocence had become something else. One evening, Elena found Caleb leaning over Maya's bed as she slept soundly. He wasn't touching her, just standing there as silent as a ghost. His lips were moving, muttering words she couldn't hear. The moonlight streamed into the room, casting an eerie glow on his face. "Caleb," Elena called softly, but her voice was as sharp as a knife. "What are you doing near your sister?" He recoiled, his eyes wide as if caught in a guilty act. I was just watching her sleep." But Elena didn't believe him. She saw something in his eyes, a cold calculation she had never seen before. That night, after making sure Caleb was in his room, she lied to Maya, telling her she had a cold and needed her mother to sleep with her. She held her daughter close all night, listening to every sound in the house, ready to wake at the slightest creak. The next morning, she made a decision. She couldn't handle this on her own anymore. She grabbed her phone and dialed Rick's number again. When he answered, she poured everything out, holding back no details, her voice cracking with fear and exhaustion. "Come here, Rick. I'm begging you, come now. Our son is drowning and I can't hold him up alone anymore. Last night he was standing over Maya's bed. I think he's going to hurt her." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Elena could hear a TV playing in the background. "You're overreacting, Elena." The man's voice finally came impatient. "He's doing stupid things, he'll get over it." Tears welled up, blurring Elena's vision. Stupid things. When he talks about sacrificing his own sister. When he looks at her like she's the key to unlocking some sick treasure. All right, he said, clearly wanting to end the call. "I'll come when I can. Maybe this weekend." And the line went dead. Elena stood motionless, the phone slipping from her numb hand. She was alone. Alone against her son's madness, the indifference of the man who was once her husband and an invisible but growing threat to her little girl. That night a storm hit. Lightning tore across the sky and the rain lashed against the windows like angry fingers. In her room, Maya had fallen asleep in the safety of her mother's arms. Elena, exhausted, had dozed off on the sofa she'd pushed against the door, ready to wake at the slightest sound. Liam in the next room couldn't sleep. He was on watch. For days he had felt something terrible was about to happen. And that night it did. In a moment of silence between two claps of thunder he heard it. A creak in the hallway. Not Caleb's usual pacing, but a stealthy, deliberate movement. He held his breath, listening. The creaking stopped right outside his mother's and Maya's room. Liam silently slipped out of bed. He tiptoed to his door and peered through the crack. In the flash of lightning from outside, he saw Caleb. His brother was standing in front of the bedroom door holding something that glinted. A knife. The old hunting knife Caleb kept in his fishing tackle box. He slowly reached for the doorknob. Liam's heart stopped. He knew his mother had locked the door, but he also knew Caleb was strong enough to break it down. Caleb didn't try to turn the knob. Instead, he began to mutter, his voice almost drowned out by the rain. "The key. Need the key. The creek is waiting. Purity will open the door. Blood will fill the barrel, and the money will flow." He raised the knife, and in the next flash of lightning, Liam saw his brother begin to pick the lock. Elena's eyes shot open. It wasn't the thunder or the rain that had woken her, but a cold dread, a mother's primal alarm sounding in her subconscious. At the same moment, she heard a small but sharp click from the door. The lock. She sprang from the sofa just as the door swung open. Caleb stood in the doorway, a hulking silhouette against the lightning flashing from the hallway. The hunting knife in his hand reflected the light grotesquely. His eyes were empty, lifeless, fixed on the bed where Maya slept soundly oblivious to the waking nightmare. "Caleb, no!" Elena screamed, her voice hoarse with horror. She threw herself forward, using her body as a shield between her son and daughter. But Caleb, as if driven by an invisible force, didn't flinch. He simply shoved her aside, a cruelly powerful push that sent her sprawling to the floor. "She has to go," Caleb repeated like a mantra. "She's the key. She said she's the key." He moved towards the bed. Maya startled awake at her mother's scream and the loud noise. She opened her sleepy eyes, and they immediately filled with terror as she saw her brother looming over her, the knife raised high. She only had time for a choked scream before Caleb's hand clamped around her small throat. "No!" Elena shrieked, scrambling to her feet with all her strength. She launched herself at her son's back, scratching, punching, trying to pull him away. But Caleb, in his madness, possessed an unnatural strength. He barely seemed to feel her blows. Just then Liam burst into the room. He hadn't hesitated for a second. Seeing the horrific scene, the skinny 15-year-old boy launched himself at his older brother with all his might, trying to push him off Maya. The three bodies collided in the cramped room. The thunder outside seemed to roar in encouragement of the deadly struggle within. Maya was choking, her face turning from red to purple, her small hands clawing desperately at her brother's steel grip. Elena, with the strength of desperation, did something she never thought she could. She saw the knife which had fallen onto the rug beside the bed during the struggle. She grabbed it. No thought, no hesitation, only the pure instinct of a mother animal protecting her young. She didn't aim for Caleb. She just wanted him to let go. She stabbed hard into the bicep of the arm that was strangling Maya. Ah! Caleb let out a scream of pain and disbelief. The shock and sudden agony made him finally release his sister. Maya fell into her mother's arms, coughing, sobbing, gasping for precious air. But Caleb didn't stop. The pain only seemed to fuel his madness. He turned his eyes blazing with hatred, blood streaming down his arm. "None of you understand," he roared. "If it's not her, the barrels will stay empty. It will all be for nothing." Liam, tears streaming down his face from fear and anger, shoved his brother hard against the wall. "You're sick, Caleb. You're sick." Elena held Maya tight, but her eyes were fixed on Caleb. That was no longer her son. It was no longer the boy she had raised, to whom she had sung lullabies every night. Before her stood a stranger, a monster born of desperation and false promises. Caleb, his back against the wall, his crazed eyes scanned the room. "I have to do it," he repeated, his voice hoarse. "Or she'll take me. The creek will claim my life." Then, like a wounded animal, he fled. Not through the front door, but out the back towards the yard, towards the blue barrels standing silent in the rain. Elena and Liam heard him lift the lid of a barrel, heard the splash as his hands hit the water. Then they heard him cry a broken, painful, shattered sob, the cry of a lost child. Elena closed her eyes, trembling. A chilling thought crossed her mind. If Caleb had crossed this line, if he had dared to lay a hand on his own sister, then nothing could stop him now. Tonight this house had become a death trap, and the monster wasn't from outside. It was living with them. The house fell into a terrifying silence after the storm. Since the attack on Maya, nothing was the same. Elena sat on her bed, her face in her hands, thinking. She couldn't call the police. They would take Caleb away, lock him somewhere she could never reach, and the stain would haunt her family forever. Rick, she knew, was useless. He would just blame her. "If I send him away, maybe he'll get better," she told herself. "But if I keep him here, he'll eventually destroy us all." A tear rolled down her cheek. The truth was cruel. She loved Caleb more than her own life, but to protect Maya and Liam, she had to sacrifice him. She considered the unthinkable, finding this Mrs. Abernathy herself, begging her, threatening her, confronting her, doing whatever it took to make her reverse the curse she had planted in her son's mind. But it was a dangerous gamble. She didn't know who this woman was or what she was capable of. She looked up at the cracked ceiling. The voice inside her trembled. "God, please give me a solution, because I have no other way." And then, as if in answer to her desperate prayer, a solution came to her. A terrible, painful, but perhaps the only one. She couldn't give her son to the police, but she could take him somewhere else. A place that could help him. A place with reinforced walls and doors that were always locked. Elena knew she couldn't wait any longer. If she stood by, sooner or later a real tragedy would happen. So that morning, when the storm had passed and the sky was a painful, piercing blue, Elena made her decision. Caleb had to be committed to a psychiatric hospital. The decision was made, but executing it was a formidable challenge. Elena spoke to Liam, her second son, and he agreed, though his heart was filled with fear and doubt. "But Mom," he asked, his voice trembling, "Caleb will never accept it. He'll go crazy." "We won't tell him until it's done," Elena replied, trying to keep her voice calm and firm. She knew it was a lie, but under the circumstances she felt she had no other choice. She had discreetly contacted a distant cousin, an old family friend in the big city, who had connections with doctors and psychiatric hospitals. He promised to arrange for a private ambulance with attendants to pick Caleb up early the next morning. But the night before that fateful day, disaster struck in a completely unexpected way. Elena wanted to talk to Caleb one last time, hoping her words might calm him down, or at least mentally prepare him for the planned trip the next day. She found him sitting in the hallway next to the two blue barrels, which stood silent and mysterious under the hall light. "Caleb," she began, her voice hesitant. Hearing his mother approach, Caleb suddenly stood up. He no longer had the exhausted or frantic look of the previous days. Instead, there was a strange lucidity in his eyes, a sharp, terrifying gaze. You think you can lock me up? He blurted out, his voice flat as if he had already guessed everything. You think I don't know what you're planning? You think I'll let you take me away from here, from these— He patted one of the barrels lightly. Elena felt her breath catch. I'm doing this to save you, son, she said, trying to keep her voice gentle. You need help. You're sick. No, Caleb replied, a cold smile on his lips. I'm not sick. I'm awake. I'm seeing the truth. Mrs. Abernathy told me. You're trying to ruin everything. Then, with a lightning-fast movement, he lunged forward. Elena just had time to see something glinting in his hand. It was the hunting knife again. Terrified, Elena immediately stood in front of her bedroom door, her arms spread wide like a shield. You're not getting through, Caleb. You're keeping me from my destiny, he roared, trying to get past her. Just then Liam rushed out from the hallway screaming, Caleb, stop! But it all happened too fast. In the struggle, Caleb swung the knife instinctively. Elena felt a sharp, cold stab, but not in herself. It was in Liam. The knife sank deep into the boy's arm. Liam screamed in pain, then staggered back, clutching his bleeding wound. Elena froze. She saw the knife clatter to the floor. Liam! She shrieked, whipping around. Caleb, also frozen, stared with wide, horrified eyes. No, I didn't mean to, he stammered, looking down at his own arm, then at the floor where Liam was clutching his wound. Elena rushed to her son's side, pressing her trembling hands against the wound. Blood seeped between her fingers, warm and thick. Liam. Mom. Liam whispered, his face pale with pain and shock. Caleb stood there like a stone statue, his eyes still wide with horror. He was no longer seeing his mother or his brother. His vacant gaze was fixed on the blue barrels standing silently under the light. The barrels, he muttered. They have to be filled. And then a strange sound came from outside. Not thunder, not rain. It was the sound of sirens. Police cars and a private ambulance pulled up in front of the house. Neighbors, drawn by the screams, began to gather outside, peering through the windows. The police flooded into the house. They found Elena kneeling beside Liam, who was fainting from blood loss. They saw Caleb standing stunned in a corner, his hands still stained with blood. And they saw the two strange blue barrels. What happened here? One of the officers asked, his voice stern. Elena, her voice weak, pointed at Caleb. He did, but she couldn't finish the sentence. Liam was starting to become delirious. Caleb was just repeating, didn't mean to. They have to be filled. The police subdued Caleb. He didn't resist. He let them lead him away, muttering only about the barrels and the promise of wealth. He would be taken to the psychiatric hospital Elena had arranged. A bitterly ironic arrangement. She had tried to save her son from madness only to be the one to send him there, albeit under tragic circumstances. The private ambulance wasn't needed to take Caleb away. It was needed for Liam. The boy was lucky to survive, but the wound would leave a scar, not just on his body but in his soul. Elena's family was completely shattered. The neighbors whispered, looking at them with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The mystery of Mrs. Abernathy and the creek remained a ghost hanging over the house. Elena knew she would never forget the whispers of the creek, the empty promises that had stolen her family's peace. As she watched Liam being bandaged and Caleb being taken away by the police, Elena felt like she was on the verge of collapse. She had sacrificed everything, sold her most precious possessions to protect her children, only to watch them be torn apart by their own nightmares. And the two blue barrels were still there in the backyard, under a mockingly clear blue sky. They were still full of water, still silent, still mysterious. They never flowed with blood. They never flowed with money. They were just barrels, a testament to a terrible lie that had led to an indelible tragedy. Elena knew those barrels would haunt her forever, a reminder of the price of greed and blindness. She tried to find out about Mrs. Abernathy, but no one in the small town knew or dared to speak of such a woman. She seemed to exist only in Caleb's mind, a product of desperation and obsession. Perhaps she was just a story, but that story had been enough to destroy her family's life. Elena sighed, her gaze distant. She had lost Caleb to madness, and Liam had suffered the physical and mental consequences. The only thing left was survival, and she knew she had to keep living for Maya. The little girl had seen too much for an 8-year-old. As the police car disappeared, Elena turned back into the house. The 2 blue barrels remained like silent witnesses to their downfall. They were a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. They were a reminder that sometimes the things that seem like solutions are the very cause of the tragedy. Years passed. The house by Blackwood Creek was sold long ago. Elena never returned to that valley. Liam and Maya moved to another city, a place with no dense forests or creeks that whispered empty promises. She worked hard, raised her 2 remaining children, trying to build a new life from the ashes of the past. Liam grew up. The scar on his arm faded, but the one in his mind never fully healed. He became quiet, reserved, always carrying a trace of melancholy. He studied hard, became an engineer, a reliable man, but joy always seemed to elude him. That night in the small room during the storm had stolen a part of his youth and innocence. Maya, thankfully, was too young to remember all the horrific details. Her memory of that night was like a bad dream, vague and fragmented. Elena did her best to shelter her, filling her life with love and peace, hoping that the good could erase the ghosts of the past. Maya grew up to be a cheerful, lively young woman, but sometimes in quiet moments Elena would still see a fleeting shadow of sadness in her eyes, a distant echo of the terror she had endured. As for Caleb, he never came back. He was diagnosed with acute schizoaffective disorder, a serious mental illness that can be triggered by extreme stress and psychological trauma. The doctors believed that his desperation over their poverty, combined with the terrifying rituals he either invented or was fed, had pushed his already fragile mind over the edge. He was transferred from one hospital to another, from one treatment center to the next. Elena visited him regularly in the early years. With each visit, she saw another piece of her son slip away. The light in his eyes slowly died, replaced by a vacant, distant emptiness. He still talked about the barrels, about Mrs. Abernathy and the creek, but his stories became increasingly disjointed and nonsensical. Mrs. Abernathy, according to him, was sometimes an old witch, sometimes a river goddess, sometimes a voice in his head. She wasn't real. She was the personification of his own despair. Eventually, the doctors advised her to stop visiting. Her presence seemed to agitate him, stirring up painful memories. With a broken heart, Elena agreed. She continued to send money to ensure he received the best care, but she never saw her son again. He was lost in the labyrinth of his own mind, and there was no path to bring him back. One autumn day, many years after the tragedy, Elena received a call from the hospital. Caleb had passed away. He had gone peacefully in his sleep. His heart, after years of enduring the chaos of his mind, had finally given out. Elena didn't cry. Her tears had run dry long ago. She felt only a vast emptiness. She hadn't lost her son on the day he died, but on the day he believed the promise of the blue barrels. After a small funeral attended by only the 3 of them, Elena, Liam, and Maya took a walk in a city park. Yellow leaves rustled under their feet. "Do you think," Liam suddenly asked, his voice thoughtful, "that Mrs. Abernathy was real?" Elena stopped, looking at the calm surface of the park's lake. "I don't know, son," she said softly. "Maybe she was real, a cruel con artist who took advantage of a desperate boy. Or maybe she was just a story Caleb created to explain his own madness, a name to blame for the dark desires in his heart." She turned to look at her 2 children, who had paid the price for the mistakes of the past. "It doesn't matter anymore. Whether she was real or not, the real monster wasn't her. The real monsters are poverty and desperation. They are what opened the door for the darkness to enter. They are what turned your brother into someone he didn't even recognize." They stood there in silence for a long time, the 3 of them, a family torn apart and pieced back together. The tragedy had left indelible scars, but it had also bound them with a strong cord of survival and love. Elena knew their story was a cautionary tale. A reminder that there are no shortcuts to wealth, that promises of instant prosperity often hide deadly traps. When people sacrifice their values for greed, It's not just their dreams that collapse, but an entire family can be plunged into tragedy. Looking at the ripples on the lake, Elena no longer saw the image of two blue barrels. She saw peace, a fragile, hard-won peace, but a real one. The echoes of the creek had fallen silent. The storm had finally passed, and though the past would always be a part of them, it would no longer define their future. They had survived, and that, after all, was the truest wealth.